Hello and welcome back to Sync and Flow, the podcast. I'm your host, Josie Thorne, and today we're going to be talking about the difference between the mental intelligence and the body based intelligence, and how important it is for us to use this framework when approaching our self healing journey. We have a separation of intelligence. We don't only have a mental intelligence. I'm sure all of you would have heard about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a body based tool. Okay, emotions arise in the body. And so we actually have multiple intelligences. We have a brain intelligence, we have a heart intelligence, we have a gut intelligence, and for women, we have a womb intelligence, okay? And so all of these centers, Juliet Allen calls them the four centers. And when understanding and processing life, we need to understand and process from each center in our mind and body. It's super important to have this balance, because if we are just stuck in the mind, stuck in the mental paradigm, we are only going to be able to heal so far. We are only going to be able to understand concepts so far. We are only going to be able to relate to ourselves and to others to a certain level, okay? Eventually, we're going to hit a ceiling, because the mental aspect of who we are is just such a small aspect. It's really pretty insignificant when we are looking at the entirety of the mind body soul complex, okay? And so what I want to speak to you about today is how important it is to be able to mentally process our trauma and our challenges, as well as physically process our trauma and our challenges through the body. So, when we experience trauma or we experience adversity, our body has a very clever, very primal part of it that helps protect us. And this is called the nervous system. Okay, the nervous system runs along a central channel called the vagus nerve that runs down the center of our body and actually hits each chakra point. And from the vagus nerve, all these minor nerves then branch out into the rest of our body and are connected to organs and muscle and tissue and fascia all over our body, okay? So our nervous system is, you can think of it like the blood and veins running all over our body. But instead of carrying blood, our nervous system carries electrical impulses that come from the brain and get sent to the rest of the body to correspond the body in sync with the mind and what the mind wants from the body. Okay. So we have our nervous system, and we have the two branches of the nervous system. On the one hand, we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest, digest, relax, and heal. Then we have, on the other side of that, we have the sympathetic nervous system, and this is the activation, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, the I need to protect myself, okay? These four things I just listed are the trauma responses that come about when our body goes into activated sympathetic nervous system state, okay? And like I said, this part of our body is very, very ancient. And so this was extremely useful back in the day when we lived in tribes, when we would need to, get that quick shot of adrenaline and cortisol in order to run away from a lion, in order to hunt our dinner, in order to, yeah, do very tribal, animalistic activities that helped us survive. okay? But in this modern world, we often become so overly activated and overly stimulated that our sympathetic nervous systems are on constant overdrive, okay? And this is extremely unhealthy. What happens is we are not able to differentiate the difference between um, a stress response from a car accident, which is life threatening, or a stress response for an exam or for overwhelm from work, which is not life threatening. The body has no way of understanding the difference. And so that's why we need the higher intelligence of the mind to help regulate the body and tell this nervous system, yes, you are acting correctly, my life is in danger, or no, you are overreacting, my life is not in danger. And on a very basic understanding, this is called nervous system regulation. I'm not going to go so deep into nervous system work, as this is something I do want to get into more later on in the podcast. But this is just a basic understanding for you guys to start to understand how the body responds, okay? So we have these two fields of awareness. We have our external awareness, which is called exteroception. And this is everything that we perceive with the senses, through our eyes, through our smelling. So what we see, what we smell, what we taste, what we hear, what we touch, okay? And then we also have on our internal perception, and this is called interoception. And this is a felt sense of everything that is going on within the body, okay? This is nervous system awareness to its core, okay? And this is, I would say, more linked to sixth sense awareness, which is an intuitive sense, okay? The sixth sense is intuition. And so we grow up in this extremely overstimulating world. And so most of our attention is focused on exteroception. It is focused on the external world, on the external reality, because we're constantly being bombarded with loud noises, cars, people, traffic, hustle, bustle, just a lot going on, especially if you live in a city. It's overwhelming for the senses, okay? And so we overdevelop our exteroception, but the downside of that is that we underdevelop our interoception, which is the felt sense of awareness from within your body, okay? All of this nervous system understanding, this mindfulness work, this self-awareness work, this neuroscience, all of this is really only coming to the masses. Yeah, it's really only coming to mass understanding within the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years. And so that means that most of us grew up with parents who didn't know how to regulate their own nervous systems, let alone teach us as children to regulate our nervous systems. Because what happens when you're a child is that you are extremely sensitive. You really are like a sponge within the first 7 years. You are absorbing everything around you. You're absorbing energy on steroids. You really are so open to perception and to experiences, because this is how we learn. We take in information through life experience. But what happens when a child's nervous system becomes dysregulated? Maybe they fell, okay, and they cut themselves, and this is a new experience for them. It hasn't happened many times, and they get a fright, and so they start crying uncontrollably. Children do not, and this is proved by science, children do not have the ability to regulate their own nervous system. That ability hasn't been formed yet. It hasn't happened in their brain development. And so children actually need the nervous system of an adult or care provider to help them co-regulate. And so that's why if you see a child screaming or angry or crying, the best thing that you can do for them is to be calm, grounded, and stable so that they can find comfort and safety in your presence. And on a very energetic level, they can co-regulate, okay? Their nervous system can feel the calmness of your nervous system. And so it's much easier for them to regulate themselves by feeling the calmness of your nervous system. And so most of us grew up without having this co-regulation or without being taught how to regulate, because a child learns how to regulate themselves by observing the adults around them. And so children, even before they can speak, they may not mentally perceive what is going on, but they feel energy so deeply. Their body is so receptive to energy, to vibes, okay? And so if you, for example, have a toddler and you and your partner are shouting in front of this toddler, even though the toddler may not mentally understand what is being said, the toddler can, on a nervous system level, feel the anger, feel the frustration, feel that sadness that is coming off of the two people in an argument, okay? And that toddler will then absorb that energy without understanding it, okay? And so in this example, you can see how easy it is for us to take on situations and absorb trauma that actually has nothing to do with us. And so a massive part of the trauma healing process and the self-healing process is really distinguishing what is my trauma versus what is other people's trauma that has just been placed onto me or I've just got absorbed in. Okay, making that differentiation is huge, because in that way you start to gather parts of yourself. Because when you are traumatized, you actually lose a part of yourself in that traumatic experience, because a part of yourself will react to that traumatic experience, but it may be too overwhelming for your nervous system to handle that processing of that event at that exact moment. And so what happens is your nervous system will put it in a folder and tuck it at the back of your brain and save it for later. This is a very ingenious part of your nervous system. It is trying to protect you in that moment from feeling overwhelmed. But what happens is the energy of that experience, of that trauma, is still in our mind and in our body. Okay? It has gone unprocessed. And so these memories are stored in our physiology, in our body and in our brain, until we have the emotional maturity and the right safe environment to process these experiences. And when I say process these experiences, I'm talking about processing on a multidimensional level. Okay? And so this is where I want to talk about the difference between talk therapy, which is all about mental processing and attitude and mental perception, and just having a good mental framework of what you are dealing with versus body-based therapy, somatic therapy, okay, which is all about dealing with the body, energy, emotions, okay, whereas talk therapy is all about dealing with thoughts and memories. So, mentally understanding your trauma is very, and accepting your trauma and forgiving anyone that may have been involved in you being traumatized is very different to you going into your body and processing it on that physical somatic level, okay? I can rationally understand my trauma, and this is often what the mind does, is it breaks down our trauma into these very compartmentalized, very bite-sized chunks for us to mentally understand, you know? But that deeply disconnects us from, because we create a story, okay? And as soon as we create a story about a situation, it immediately puts us in the objective seat. It puts us in the objective perceiver of our own lives. But in reality, you are the subjective experiencer of your life. And so creating a story around what's happened to you in your past is only going to disconnect you from that experience on a bodily level. Okay, because our mind likes to compartmentalize, it likes to put it all in a box and wrap it with a pretty bow and make it look presentable. But that's not how the body experiences life. Okay, the body experiences life through the messiness that, and through the chaos that is feelings, that is emotions, that is energy coming and going. Because in reality, emotions are just energy in motion. And what I learned is that an emotion roughly lasts 90 seconds, 1.5 minutes is the lifespan of an emotion, okay? Anything that lasts longer than that is your attachment to that emotion, is the story that you've created around that emotion. And so that's why I say stories just disconnect us further from what we are experiencing. And so somatic healing, body-based healing, is really about developing that interoception, that felt sense of experiencing life in a human body. And that is really, it's a subtle experience because we often get these signs, we often get these warning signs. So before the full-blown panic attack hits us, we will get these breadcrumbs of warning signs from our body way in advance before the full-blown panic attack hits us. But we only take notice of the panic attack because we are so primed on a mental level to notice the obvious, to notice the in your face, the bright, the loud, the stimulating. On an interoceptive level, that actually numbs us. It desensitizes our interoceptions. It desensitizes us from feeling into the body, from understanding on a somatic level what is going on. So I'll give you an example. Whenever I feel anxiety, it often first starts as a knot in my stomach, and this knot will then come up into my chest, and it will feel very heavy in my chest, as if someone is compressing my lungs. And then my palms will start to sweat, maybe my underarms will start to sweat, and I'll start to feel this jittery kind of feeling in my body. That is a description of my interoception when I experience anxiety. And so really our job is to learn on a deeper level, what are the warning signs? How is my body communicating to me, to my conscious awareness? Okay. Because what happens is our body actually reacts to situations based on past experiences. Your subconscious stores past experiences and uses past experiences to inform the future so that you know how to respond in future. But if you have unhealthy coping mechanisms, such as getting very angry, such as crying, such as, having these emotional outbursts that, there's nothing wrong with having an emotional outburst, but having an emotional outburst that affects others and is damaging to relationships, that's not a fun experience. When you start taking out your emotions on others and projecting your emotions on others, that is very damaging for relationships. And so interoception is learning how to read the signs of the body before it becomes this full-blown explosion. And some people explode, but others may implode. It all just depends on your childhood, your upbringing, and whether you as a child felt like you had the space to healthily express your emotions and be received in that expression. And so when it comes to understanding our trauma, it is so important that not only do we go to talk therapy and speak it out loud, thereby removing shame, okay? Because shame only is cultivated through keeping things a secret. So when we express our traumas and our secrets, we actually distinguish shame. We release shame from the story. And once we can start to, speak about it in a more calm way without getting emotional, without getting triggered, we can start to become a lot more familiar with the sensations that arise when we speak about something that may be challenging for us to share. And so it becomes easier for us to share about our traumatic experiences. But if you are only going to talk therapy, you unfortunately are doing yourself a disservice, because trauma is stored in the body. It is not stored in the mind. Trauma is stored in your nervous system. Trauma is stored in the microfascia that run and muscle tissues that run all over your body. And so that's why trauma has a multi-dimensional manifestation, because it lives in the body and in the nervous system, but it has an effect on the mind. It has an effect on your day-to-day behavior. It has an effect on even just the way that you carry yourself. If you are a woman and you were body shamed growing up, or feel shame around your body, maybe the way that you hold yourself is like very hunched over and you have bad posture, like most of the time those are physical responses to trauma. Whereas once you start to release that trauma, you may feel more confident to, open your chest, relax your shoulders, and live with an open heart. It's really, really all about the heart space and how open we feel in the heart, because we cannot receive life, we cannot receive love if we are stuck in a survival protective nervous system state. We cannot. It really blocks us to receiving the fullness of life, the fullness of relating, the fullness of experiences. I have to quickly interrupt this episode to tell you guys all about my self-development, self-study course called Root and Reboot. Root and Reboot is all about healing the root chakra, which is the foundations of our being. If we do not have a healthy root chakra, energy cannot flow through our system, and we will find ourselves constantly feeling unsafe in this world. In order to heal this, we need to dive deep into inner child healing and really look at the connection that we have formed with our bodies, becoming more connected and developing a felt sense awareness of being present in our bodies. This course will give you the tools to do in your own time and take it one step at a time as you navigate this very important foundational aspect of healing. If you think about it, we are just like trees. In order for us to thrive, we have to have a healthy root system to bring us the nutrients, energy, and minerals that we need to grow and survive. If your root structure is damaged and you haven't done any form of foundational healing, then this is the journey for you. If you would like to find out more information, see the show notes for links to the website and course sales page. So some of my favorite tools to work with trauma and stuck emotions in my body, one of my favorites has got to be yoga. Yoga has been proved to help dramatically with trauma processing. Another one of my favorites is definitely got to be breath work. Breath work is an amazing way to integrate mind and body. Another one can be body de-armoring, TRE, trauma release exercises, kinesiology, any form of somatic work that focuses on a body first approach is going to help you release trauma. Maybe one of your trauma responses is to freeze, because as a child you didn't feel like there was space for your emotions to be expressed. Then in order to heal, you actually need to practice the exact opposite of what your trauma response is. And this may seem counterintuitive, but hear me out. If your natural tendency is to shut down, disassociate, leave your body, go quiet, really go in the shell, then what you need to practice is actually activating yourself. You need to practice practices that bring you back into your body, that activates and raise your heartbeat and, bring you into that very physical felt sense of, I am in a body, I am in a body, I am feeling overwhelmed, I am feeling overwhelmed in my body. Overwhelmed in my body feels like XYZ. And these could be anything. It feels like a ton of bricks. It feels like a knot in my stomach. It feels like a tight chest. It feels like my throat is closing up. All of these are somatic experiences of the trauma responses. Whereas on the other hand, a person that has a natural response of fighting, this is a very externally projected response. This is you get hot, you get heavy, you get very activated, you want to, punch someone in the face, you feel very claustrophobic, you may be pacing up and down. This is a very activating trauma response. And so someone in this state, in order to heal, they need to practice doing the exact opposite of that, which is more down regulating practices. Yin yoga, deep, slow breathing, sitting still, coming back to solitude, coming back to quietness, coming back to calmness. EFT tapping is an amazing, amazing somatic practice to help move stuck energy. So as you can see, there's so many different trauma responses, and there's many different ways that all of us will approach different traumatic situations and respond to them based on our upbringing and what it was safe for us to do as a child. So often we think that we have processed an experience or mentally understood how XYZ in our childhood affected us. So often we think that we have forgiven and we've moved on and we've let go and we've surrendered and we've accepted, we've accepted the stories of our trauma. But on a body-based level, those experiences are still probably there. If you've never done body-based work, somatic therapy, all of these things that I've mentioned with a professional, and the reason it's so important to do it with a professional is that it's so easy for you to spin out into fight or flight, into a sympathetic activation where you feel unsafe. And so what a professional space holder, facilitator, therapist can do is they can hold space for you and remind you that you are safe, okay? It's like that child that I spoke about earlier that needs that holding, that hug, that cuddle to feel safe enough to express their emotions and release the experience through that emotional expression. Emotions are just our body's way of moving energy. And so if we shut down our emotions or we deny our emotional expression, that creates trauma in our body. That creates stuck, stagnant energy in our body. How many times have you guys gone to a yoga class and started crying from a certain position? I remember we always used to do bridge at the end of yoga classes, and I always used to cry in bridge. Bridge is an amazing pose for releasing emotion that are stored in the lower half of our body, that are stored in the lower 3 chakras, because that is where our trauma gets stored, especially as women. All of our, and as men actually, it's stored in our psoas, which is this very emotional muscle that connects our back and goes through our hips to our legs. It is this massive, massive muscle. And so the psoas actually has a very emotional response, an emotional purpose. And so all of our trauma and tensions and stress gets stored in our psoas and in our hips, and as women it gets stored in our hips and in our womb space. And so as women, if we are not connecting to our womb space and not doing body-based release practices on a daily basis or on a regular basis, we are going to accumulate a life's worth of emotions and trauma and unprocessed shit that really just becomes like this mud that sits in your body and weighs you down and blocks you and creates insecurities, really blocks you from feeling the fullness of life. It blocks you from your pleasure. It blocks your chakras. And so energy cannot flow freely through your chakra system, through your body. And so what happens is, if there's all this mud sitting in the lower half of our body, in the psoas, in the lower chakras, the solar plexus, the sacral, and the root, if there's all this mud, all this trauma, this stuck energy, what happens is anytime that we send our consciousness into our body, for example, when we do yoga or when we want to have sex, we want to be in our bodies. We don't want to be in our mind. But if we have all of this stuck trauma, this mud, what happens is the consciousness goes into the body and it says, oh, I don't want to be here. There's so much trauma. There is so much unprocessed chaos. Why would I want to be here? It's hectic. Let me just go straight back in the mind. And so the mind almost becomes a safe space for the consciousness to reside, in an avoidance to facing our traumas, in an avoidance to facing our past. And this is not a bad or good thing. This is just the body's way of protecting us. And so we have to thank ourselves, like thank our bodies on a deep level and say, thank you for protecting me. Thank you for doing your job. But as the higher mind, I am choosing and telling you, my nervous system, that it is safe to go here. And that's why working with facilitators and therapists is so helpful, because they can help take you further than you can take yourself, because they've been in your shoes and they know how to break through that glass ceiling that you are hitting every time you come up against a block, and anxiety and stressor and insecurity, whatever it may be. And so that's why tools such as breath work are so powerful, because breath work overrides the ego mind and allows us to just be in that felt sense of awareness, that witness consciousness that we can develop. And when we can develop that witness consciousness, we can have a much more deeper control over our emotional and physical reactions to life experiences, because we can witness ourselves going into fight or flight, and we can be like, oh, there we go again. Okay, I'm noticing that my chest is feeling tight, my throat is closing up, and my stomach feels like it's in a knot. Therefore, I know that these are the 3 signals that my body is giving me to tell my conscious mind that I'm about to go into a stress response. Okay, and that means that I need to actually, in those moments, create more safety for myself, whatever that may look like to you. Sometimes that may be needing to be alone, and sometimes that may be needing to be with another, and sometimes we need to be held by others, and sometimes we need to learn to hold ourselves in those moments. And so it's very dependent on what you are working through and your unique circumstances. Okay, all of this is very broad, and I'm trying to give you guys a general understanding of how the nervous system works and why it's so important for us to connect on a physical, somatic, emotional level with our bodies. Somatic processing can also look different for every person. Some people, it may be giving yourself the space to have an adult tantrum, all for condoning adult tantrums. An adult tantrum is a conscious tantrum. It means that you are away from anything or anyone that may harm yourself or may harm others. And it's giving yourself the space to allow that inner child to process what they need to process, because our childhood self lives within us as our inner child. And sometimes that inner child needs to have a tantrum, just like we did when we were children. It needs to rage, it needs to scream, it needs to cry, it needs to release that energy. You are not allowing yourself to experience what it's like to have an emotional reaction, to have an intense emotional reaction. You are probably not allowing yourself to, first of all, experience the fullness of what it means to be human, and secondly, process the depths of your trauma. And that's why trauma healing is a messy process, a messy, non-linear, chaotic process. Sometimes it looks like quietly crying and journaling and, speaking to a friend. And other times it looks like screaming and shouting and raging and bashing your arms on the pillow, like physically getting it out and like using your body. I really just want to show you guys, we need to use our body. And so we need to allow ourselves to go into the body and experience the messy, chaotic, emotional stuff that is there for us. We have emotions for a reason, and emotions are meant to be felt. Okay? Emotional maturity is allowing yourself to feel your emotions. Having emotional maturity means that you see the value in processing your emotions. You just have the maturity to not project it onto anyone else. Knowing that your emotions belong to you, they don't belong to others. They are about you and your felt lived experience that is influenced by your triggers and your past and your conditioning. So if you take anything away from this podcast, from this episode, please let it be that you need to allow yourself to have a freak out every now and then. You need to allow yourself to let your inner child come out. Let your inner child express themselves. Okay? Because the more you allow for that emotional expression of heavy, dense energy, whether that's anxiety or depression or frustration or anger or sorrow or grief or jealousy, whatever that is for you, if you allow yourself to consciously and maturely process that through the body, through emotional expression, then that is going to open you up so much more to feeling the other side of that, okay? Because on the other side of grief is bliss. On the other side of sadness is happiness. On the other side of pain is pleasure. Emotions are a spectrum. And so if we allow ourselves to feel those heavy, deep, dark emotions, then that creates more space in our body to receive and feel the higher vibrational emotion. But we cannot bypass the lower density emotions. We have to feel them in order to get through to the other side. We cannot spiritually bypass that experience. Those emotions have to be felt. And usually that felt experience is messy and it's chaotic and it's ugly and it's not pretty. It's not aesthetic. It doesn't look good. It doesn't feel good. And it's often quite scary. And so learning the nervous system tools, learning the tools that you need to come back to a calm, regulated nervous system is going to be the difference between processing in an unhealthy way and processing in a healthy way. If we do not know how to regulate our nervous system and come back to a grounded state of being, then most of the time that processing and that emotional expression is just going to re-traumatize us and create more stuckness and more stagnant energy. So we need to learn the mindfulness-based tools that are available to us in order to process in a as healthy way as possible.